The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Well, greetings one and all, and welcome to another episode. In fact, this is episode 18 of Walking Through the Language of the Heart with our good friend and co-host, Chris S. Hey, Chris.
Monty, good to see you here tonight.
Well, listeners, as I said, this is episode 18, which means this is article 18 out of this incredible book. This really, truly is an historical document. The Language of the Heart, Bill W.'s Grapevine writings from 1944 to 1970. And we've been going through this article by article. And much like other workshops that Chris and I have done together, it's pretty lengthy and in depth. But we love doing this, and we love bringing it to you, listeners. And I want to let you know that if you want to catch up on these, visit us at take12radio.com. We have a brand new, colorful Recovery Workshops banner on that site. Click on it, and it'll take you right to the link, Walking Through the Language of the Heart. You can catch up on these shows. You can download them for fun and for free, make copies of them, share them with your home group, your friends, whatever. We would be more than happy for you to do that. So, Chris, where are we going with this thing this week?
You know, this whole thing has been a really incredible journey for me through the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, when it was being developed to what it really is today. I mean, you know, there's been some changes since 1947. We're in November 1947 tonight. There's certainly been some changes, but the architecture is being laid out, and we still have this architecture, and most, if not all, of the positions and the perspective that Bill lays out in these articles really still exists today, you know, when in the 12-step world. Now, we're going to be talking about tonight incorporations, their use and misuse. And if it's anything like some of the ones that we did before, it sounds like it's going to be boring. But a lot of time, you know, good, we're going to be talking about incorporations in 1947.
Right.
But I'm telling you, some of those are the most interesting ones, the ones that you think are going to be dry. Just so let's get going. Let's see what he has to say about incorporations. I'm figuring he's talking about clubhouses. He might be talking about Alcoholics Anonymous itself, but let's see what where he's going to get at. What is he thinking? What is Bill thinking in November of 1947? So let's see. Many an AA group ruefully writes the New York office asking how to unscramble endless difficulties that have arisen over the incorporation and financing of clubs, drying out places, educational projects, and the like. Most sincerely, these groups wish that they had never gone into business. Once off to an awkward start, these difficulties are sometimes hard to cure. Still, if we intelligently use the experience we've already had, our newer groups ought to easily avoid these growing pains. The purpose of this piece is to assemble and focus our experience on these particular problems. So, in the earlier days of Alcoholics Anonymous, this was a new thing. This was, I can't believe it, but there's a solution to alcoholism. All these hopeless alcoholics are getting sober. We're getting articles in magazines. People are flooding in, and the membership is growing by leaps and bounds. Let's do some other stuff. Let's do this. Let's do this, and I swear, I still see this in the service structure. I still see it in the service structure. So many people want to change things or make it better or put a new pamphlet out or rewrite the big book or there's just so many people are excited about, change. And, as I kind of mature in my recovery, I find it more satisfying really to look backwards, to do like what we're doing now, to see where this thing came from, not what I can change it into, not what I can rewrite, but that's just me. But so many of these articles, what they really are is they're giving us the information for us to understand that the best practices really are what are going to be laid out and finalized in the coming articles as the 12 traditions, and then later on as the 12 concepts. Bill is going really deep into this and figuring out how to keep us out of trouble. Because I don't know about you, Monty, but I could get in trouble, So, and some of these alcoholics were kind of new, I mean, the fellowship was doubling and tripling like every year, so you got a lot of people who can get in trouble.
Let me interrupt you for a minute. I wanted to ask you, I meant to ask you this last week. If we're looking at today's world in comparison to 1947, for instance, with looking, I don't even know if we can compare it, but looking at the opiate epidemic, let's say, versus the way alcohol and our relationship to alcohol and alcoholism was going on back in 1947, do you feel that it was as big of an issue back then, alcohol was, as opiate abuse is today?
I think it was a bigger issue, and I think alcoholism is still a bigger issue than the opiate epidemic. Mm-hmm. Statistics will show way more people die of alcohol misuse than opiate misuse.
Yeah.
Still to this day, it's become so routine that you don't get a lot of press about it. The fentanyl, it's like a drug from China. It's more sexy, to talk about, people dying from it. And listen, I'm not saying it's not a crisis and we shouldn't look at it. I'm just saying that, alcohol misuse and death from alcoholism is still a bigger problem than the opiate epidemic, So I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but another thing I'd like to just briefly discuss about the opiate epidemic is, each 12-step fellowship, if it's a healthy 12-step fellowship, it's going to have a singleness of purpose. It's going to have a common problem that it's going to apply a common solution to, right? So Alcoholics Anonymous, are we aware of the opiate epidemic if we're people in Alcoholics Anonymous? Absolutely. Is Alcoholics Anonymous as a fellowship going to step in and try to help? Not officially. But there are many people in Alcoholics Anonymous that are quietly trying to help people who are showing up in the rooms who, they can be alcoholic and they can be dying of opiate misuse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You see them dropping in your groups. I see them dropping in my groups. Yeah. So there's like some help that's happening, but it's not official. It's not within our traditions. It's not within our singleness of purpose. but as compassionate people in recovery, when we can help, we will try to. Does that
Yeah.
feel right to you, Monty?
Yeah, yes, it does. And one of the reasons I asked that question is one of the attitudes that I've witnessed in serving in a treatment environment is from clients that come in, and when you discuss with them what was, when we're using the term substance use disorder, what was their substance of choice, or what, we're looking at their maybe it's their rap sheet or their letter from their PO or whatever it is. Often the comment that I get is, well, yeah, I only did alcohol though. For me, it was primarily alcohol, nicotine and alcohol, but it was just alcohol. It's almost like there's this minimization of it. It's like it's not that big of a deal, and I'm like, it's a huge deal. And it's just interesting how people, it seems like, I don't know the term you use, but it's like it's regular. It's normalized. It's like, that's just one of those things.
Mm-hmm. It's legal.
Yeah, it's legal. It's socially acceptable to be an alcoholic, even living under the bridge. But boy, if you're slamming cocaine or something like that, we don't want to talk to you. And yet the alcoholic in his cups is a mess.
Absolutely. Like if you look at a heroin addict and then you look at an alcoholic who are both in end stage use,
mm-hmm.
the heroin addict's safer to be around. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like alcohol can bring on forms of insanity that are ugly to see. So opiates just kind of make you lazy, and you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nuts to start. It's nuts to start saying things like well, I don't cotton to the those drug addicts, or I'm glad I'm just an alcoholic. It's a misunderstanding of what addictive illness is.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you one quick story. I sponsored a guy. He showed up in 1992, and I started sponsoring him. And he was a flat junkie. If you looked at the last 10 years of his life, it was all heroin addiction, right? All of it. But when you looked into his history, this is what you found. In the 70s, he was drinking like a fish, and his liver was giving out. He was ending up in the hospital, with really bad liver problems. So he switched to heroin, and for 10 years he didn't drink. So one of the characteristics of heroin is if you do enough of it and you're an alcoholic, you won't need to drink.
Yeah.
It kind of bulldozes over the physical craving and the obsession of the mind. I mean,
yeah.
You're already toasted. So he shows up in AA, and a lot of people are saying you're in the wrong fellowship. You're a drug addict. No, he was treating his alcoholism with heroin, and he became addicted to heroin. But if you really look at what was going on with him, he was alcoholic. You know what I mean? He had every characteristic of an alcoholic, and I worked with him for 15 years. I would certainly know. You know what I mean? So anyway, you just never know until you really dig into somebody's personal experience and personal history, what's going on.
Right.
But there was also a lot of people that showed up that never drank, and they got arrested for an 8 ball of cocaine, and they ended up in AA, and like the self-cleaning oven it is, they weren't around very long because it was the wrong place for them. They kind of figured it out. Nobody threw them out. They just kind of weren't identifying and weren't connecting. I don't know how I got on that tangent. I'm going to get back to our job here, which is to read this article. So it says, first, let's review those parts of the 12 points of AA tradition which bear directly on the status of incorporation and their financing. Tradition 6 states, we think, therefore, that any considerable property of genuine use to AA should be separately incorporated and managed, thus dividing the material from the spiritual. An AA group as such should never go into business. Clubs, hospitals, etc. ought to be incorporated, so set apart that they can be freely discarded by the groups. Hence, they ought not to use the AA name. Their management should be the sole responsibility of those who financially support them. We've heard this. This is like the third time we've heard this.
Right.
Hospitals or places of recuperation ought to be well outside AA and medically supervised. An AA group may cooperate with anyone, but such cooperation ought never go so far as affiliation or endorsement, expressed or implied. Tradition 7 states, after declaring for full financial self-support as soon as possible, that any public solicitation of funds using the name Alcoholics Anonymous is highly dangerous, whether by groups, clubs, hospitals, or other outside agencies. That acceptance of large gifts from any source or of contributions carrying any obligation whatever is unwise. That we view with concern those AA treasuries which continue beyond prudent reserves to accumulate funds for no stated purpose. That nothing can so surely destroy our spiritual heritage as feudal disputes over property, money, and personal authority. So he knew this in the 40s. Monty, let me tell you something that I'm currently involved with. Okay, that bears on this. So I'm a board member of a group of people in New Jersey who banded together basically to try to do something about the opiate epidemic. There were kids in this town, a very upper middle class town, that were dying, and it was just unacceptable. For 5 high school kids in a year to overdose. So a group of people got together and really, with great intentions. And they're great people, and they've got great intentions. They put together this organization, and they asked me to be a board member, and I'm on their recovery committee, right? But they do all kinds of stuff. They do they do prevention. They do vaping clinics. Narcan trainings. They're involved in like the whole Megillah. But they got somebody that donated a huge building to them, to this particular organization that's separately incorporated, right? And there was a 4-car garage in the back, and they had it torn down, and they're building a community center, a 2-story community center, and it's gonna be great. And what they want is 12-step recovery there. They want DAA, they want NA, they want AA, they want CA, they want gamblers, they want Al-Anons. They built this center, to be a recovery community house. Now, they asked me, they said, how do we get established? How do we get people interested who would be willing to start meetings here? And I said, well, I'll give it a try. I'll reach out to a couple of people, and we'll put a meeting together. And, it'll just be like an exploratory meeting where, we talk about the facility. We talk about what the responsibility of the groups is going to be, and we, kind of like maybe put a little steering committee or something together to find people who will champion meetings in this facility. And all I did was send out a couple of emails to a couple of people, and the problems are already starting. You know what I mean? The personalities are already starting. I'm gonna end up looking like an idiot. What is Chris trying to do? I swear. So when he's talking about this stuff, when he's the recovery community needs to be outside of the business. He's not kidding. Property, money, property, prestige. This is about property, Monty. It's not going to be our property, but it'll be property we can use there's already problems.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I'm getting emails that, it's so I get it. I get what Bill Wilson probably had to put up with, or a lot of these early people had to put up with when they started clubhouses. You know what I mean?
Sure. Oh my goodness.
All right. It says here, being clear on these basic principles, it is next suggested that 4 of the articles in this book can be carefully reread. See pages 24, 46, and 51, and 43 for the ones on money, clubs, hospitals, and outside enterprises, which he's already written about, which show our past experience in these fields. They clearly reveal the fundamentals of our money management tradition, and in a general way, they quite clearly indicate what the corporate status of any useful or related enterprise ought to be. Next then, just what special type of incorporation is best? How should it be corporately named? What should be the limit of its scope? Who should be its members or stockholders? And how should it be financed? Many AAs write us asking for samples of model charters. As precise group purposes, local conditions, and state laws may vary much, it would probably be unwise for AA headquarters to try to meet these requests. Any good attorney, once he is sure just what is needed and just what should be avoided, will do far better than us. So he's, once more, he was sending us to the doctors, before. Now he's sending us to the attorneys because they're going to be the people who understand this particular business. In response to the many group inquiries, we wish, however, to be as definite as possible. So here follows a set of typical questions that groups ask. To them, we append definite answers. Of course, these answers aren't to be construed as final or perfect, nor are they to be thought of as rules, regulations, or musts, but they may help in perplexing situations. 1, let's go through some of these questions. These are, he was getting tons of mail back then. How do you do this? How do you do that? Bill, you should know, And so he understands what the questions usually are. 1, should an AA group as such ever incorporate? No. Some have, but usually wish they hadn't. Okay. Question number 2. Should an AA group as such go into the business of running a club, a hospital, a research, educational, or rehabilitation venture? We think definitely not. Experience has been telling us to avoid this. The AA group ought to remain a spiritual entity. Question 3. But how about clubs? Being so close to AA, shouldn't they be an exception? Just why shouldn't they bear the AA name and be managed by the group itself? We used to think they should. When a group is small and merely hires a room, it is quite natural to call the place an AA club room. Conversationally, most clubs are still called AA clubs. But when an area contains many AAs and perhaps several groups, not all the AA members will care for clubs. Hence, the business management of the club or clubs in the area must become the function of those who individually contribute to their support, and the corporate title should omit AA. The contributors ought to elect the business management. Then other AAs can take the club or leave it alone. Club corporations often adopt a related title, such as Alano or Alcanon. But more remote ventures, such as farms or drying out places operated by individual AAs, ought not use these related titles. So we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Monty. There were some places that were being established. High Watch Farm. I mean, there was a number of them, and you would go there to dry out. And they were run by AAs. And there was a lot of AA processes that you would be exposed to in these drying out farms, but you would be secluded, from the general population for your experience there. Mm-hmm. And so they're starting to have that experience, and they're starting to say, do not call that AA. Do not associate Happy Hills Farm with AA. And that's, to this day, still being followed. I don't know of any AA treatment centers, which is a good thing. But they had the early experience where they tried everything, and the stuff that didn't work, They stopped trying, and they're giving us some warning. Number 4, our group did form a separate corporation for our club. We made every one of our AA group members a voting member of that corporation. Now the directors of the club corporation are at odds with our group rotating committee. The club directors try to run both the club and the group. The group committee also tries to run the club. What do we do about that? There is nothing like an alcoholic who wants to be in charge of everything because their way is superior to everybody else's, Monty. Have you ever experienced that?
Absolutely. I may have told you this story one time of the AA group that was in this little tiny country town up north here. It met in a Girl Scout hut, and it was renting the Girl Scout hut. And then the NA group would come. It was like from 6 to 7:30, and then the NA group would come from 8 to 9:30. It was the exact same members, exactly to the name, to the letter. It was the same people. But when you tried to have a barbecue, right, you couldn't decide on what time or anything because you can't be affiliated. But you're the same people. Why can't you just have a barbecue and call it a barbecue? Why do you have to call it anything other than, hey, we're having a barbecue? Yeah. But man, it caused problems because there was always that 1 or 2 people that had to control it all.
I'm telling you, I've known, heck, I've sponsored people like that. There's sometimes a drive to be number one, and unfortunately, Monty, a lot of times people like that end up in our service and end up in the service structure. Mm-hmm. They become GSRs or DCMs or delegates or whatever, and then you just, it's just you're giving them an avenue to to exercise their ego. It's not a pretty sight.
Yeah.
So it says, this is a natural difficulty. It can be corrected by a realization on the part of the club directors that theirs is a duty of providing a suitable club only, a pure business operation. They merely hold or rent the property, keep the place policed and swept out. They raise money from individual monthly pledges. They also receive rentals from the treasuries of such AA groups as may hold meetings in the club. This is usually a generous proportion of those funds which result from passing the hat. Each AA group ought to have its own small treasury. Out of these funds, the group pays for whatever use it may make of the local club. This avoids confusion between group monies and club corporation funds. Under these conditions, the club has no special hold on the group and vice versa. Pure AA matters are handled by the group committee, but jurisdiction over social activities in the club will vary. Sometimes the club directors handle them, sometimes the group committee, sometimes a special committee. There's often confusion about club membership and AA membership. In a limited sense, they're one and the same thing, as practically all clubs open their doors to every reasonably well-behaved AA who wishes to frequent them. But when club management is involved, we are beginning to believe a distinction should be made between club privileges, voting membership, and AA membership. Any AA interested in a club ought to be willing to contribute regularly to its support. Though he may not be able to contribute much, it will be something. Obviously, as a monthly contributor, he should be eligible to serve as a club officer or director and should vote at business meetings. While straight AA is free as air and most clubs are wide open to all, there seems no good reason why a persistent non-contributor should claim any right to vote at a club's business meeting. If he wants to help manage the club's money, he ought to contribute a little himself. So when we come to distinguish clearly between club privileges, club voting membership, and AA membership itself, we shall have surmounted many current troubles. Wow, he's saying in here, if you're not giving money, if you're a club, you want to be a club member and you're not contributing, don't vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I got to say, I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many people don't put money in the basket after their lives have been saved by a fellowship that, the customary contribution is still like $1.
That's crazy.
It's sad to see.
That's crazy, $1, because when the basket's passed today, if all I have in my pocket is $1, it's going in. But I got to tell you, I feel horrible about it, because you can't. The price of everything just in the last 6 months, lots of stuff has literally doubled. And I know we can't. That doesn't mean that our income's doubled. But I think, to be honest with you, if I be completely transparent, even in my own walk through this journey, much of the time I could have given more than I did. And now I do that because I just believe it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I'm a $3 to $5 basket dropper myself.
Yeah.
But I'm not telling other people to do that.
Yeah.
I just kind of feel it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
All right. Question number 5, Monty. Our group is small. Every local AA member is a club enthusiast. Do you think we should incorporate just the same, even though AA membership and club membership are identical, and in our town, everybody contributes to the club? If your club has to sign a lease, buy property, or have a sizable bank account, by all means incorporate. Establish this way of doing and thinking, and you will avoid later complications. We suggest you be careful about mixing AA affairs with your club business. Business only there. A club room may, of course, be so small and inexpensive of its future, or its future so uncertain that it would be premature to incorporate. That's a matter for sound judgment. So, my experience in the Northeast is church basements.
Right.
9 out of 10 meetings are in church basements. So it's just rent. We don't get involved with the maintenance, or we might have somebody sweep up, or try to pick up the cigarette butts in the parking lot, or stuff like that. But it's normally not our experience in the Northeast to deal too much with clubs. But this opportunity that I was telling you about earlier with a community center, that might have different connotations. It'll depend upon what the landlords are gonna want from the groups. One of the reasons we're having a meeting is to figure that out. So, all right. Question number 6. Should a club corporation charter include other activities such as rehabilitation, hospitalization, education, research, etc.? We think definitely not. We suggest you limit corporation charters to one activity in one location only. To incorporate the whole world of alcohol and mix that up with AA almost invariably leads to confusion. A simple, sharply limited objective is best. Mixtures of several functions we have sometimes tried, but usually with poor results. Question number 7. May individual AAs organize foundations and raise money for research, education, and rehabilitation? There can be no objection if they act as individuals only and do not use the AA name in any way. But experience shows that there is always a strong temptation to use the AA name. If that is done, the project will ultimately suffer because the surrounding AA groups will protest strongly, and rightly so, we think. The Alcoholic Foundation itself, though it unofficially represents AA as our general service board, has solicited no outside funds in recent years, and it will soon abandon the title Foundation. And it did pretty soon after that. There's been mistakes made with messing with money, Monty. One of the big mistakes is to allow a huge surplus of money. It's usually a lazy treasurer, right? Allow a huge surplus of money to build up. One of the principles that they came up with later on was one of prudent reserve. And you can define prudent reserve as 3 months operating expenses, 6 months operating expenses. Different groups define it in different ways. But to allow the money to get too large really invites trouble, because, hey, and groups, a lot of times, just because they're uninformed, they don't understand the traditions. They haven't really paid much attention. They haven't become informed group members. I was part of a group once that one of our beloved members died. One of our beloved members died. And the treasurer decided to donate $200 to the American Cancer Association out of the treasury money. Now, something like that sounds very compassionate, oh yeah, in old Joe's memory, he was a great group member, and we don't. No, you can't. I'm sorry. As individuals, you can do that, but that's not what you're supposed to do with the group funds. And a lot of times districts and areas get in trouble. I remember this one guy telling a story where they came to the conclusion that they needed a big, huge neon sign for their convention. They were going to do like a young person's convention or something. And the neon sign was like $2,800. Or, you put it up there. Oh, this everybody's what the hell are you doing? You know what I mean? Sound judgment, ruled after all. But we can do the craziest things if we've got too much money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All right, question 8. We want to build a clubhouse. Should we do so? And how shall we finance it? Chances are that any club built will prove too small. Better lease if you can. A thickly populated AA area will eventually do better with several small lease clubs than a single costly one. If a club is big, expensive, and owned outright, it can later prove very difficult to take or leave alone. It's always better for members to raise the money among themselves if they must build, supplemented, if absolutely necessary, by a friendly outside loan calling for easy but definite repayment. Our reputation for complete self-support is a valuable asset. Beware of loans or contributions with implied obligations, political entanglements, or controversial issues attached. And obviously, public solicitation using the AA name is dangerous. I've never heard of anybody, putting a bunch of people together and getting a loan, like this organization that I was telling you about earlier, they got huge amounts of money donated. They're not a 12-step organization. They're a 501(c)(3), non-profit. And they can do what they want with the money. The groups that come in must establish a rent and what other expectations do you have? If the expectations are to become part of the organization or contribute to the organization, it's not going to work. You know what I mean? So the spiritual entity of the meeting has to be outside of any of those crazy kind of obligations. Now they can want us to stay clean. They can want us to make our own coffee, maybe buy our own coffee pots, and maybe buy our own chairs. There might be stuff like that, but getting us involved in the organization itself would be an affiliation, and we're going to need to let them know that we can't spiritually do that.
I think there's a lot of freedom in this, in holding a lease and not owning a building and being non-affiliated. I understand the heart behind wanting to do things like other people do, but gosh, you just avoid all sorts of bondage and legal problems. And I think that Bill understands this. Again, we've talked about this at length before, how he can foresee the problems that haven't even showed up yet. And I think the AA meeting that is probably the most popular one here in Lynn County, they've always leased a building. They've never owned it, although they are the only occupants of it, right? And so if you walked into it, you would swear they owned it, because the decorations, the placards, the all the sayings on the walls, the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, everything is so permanently placed, you would swear it was owned. But they're never going to go down that road because they enjoy the freedom they have in leasing.
Yeah, it's smart. Even leases. I'm unaware of any groups in our area that sign a lease with the churches, because therein would lie a problem. Who's going to sign the lease? There's really nobody in charge. Who's in charge here? Nobody. We've got a secretary and we got a chairperson, but they're not in charge. So luckily, many entities understand our shortcomings as far as a business venture is concerned, and they'll allow us a month-to-month rental agreement or something with no signature. Now, a lot of places are asking for insurance, and what'll happen usually is the treasurer will be asked to go get a policy, and sometimes they'll have a lot of questions or a lot of challenges doing that, but most of the groups in our area have liability policies now because the churches are asking them to do that. So it is possible to do some business, but you want to do like the least amount possible is basically what Bill is telling us here.
Don't the area or the district, don't they usually carry an insurance policy?
If they do, none of us have been aware of it who had to go get insurance policies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's really not that expensive. It's like $1 million liability was like $300 a year or something.
Right.
The last time I looked, for a meeting like that, but if that's a requirement for us to be able to use a space, that's an acceptable challenge. To get an insurance. That's a responsible challenge.
Sure.
You know what I mean? All right, question number 9. What about drying out places? How ought they be handled? We feel that AA groups shouldn't go into these ventures, but individual AAs sometimes handle these situations very well if they avoid public solicitations and advertising using the AA name. Places of recuperation ought to be a private undertaking purely and privately financed. And that, we don't have any challenges with that today.
No.
That's really what has happened. Question number 10. What should be the attitude of an AA group toward outside ventures like education, research, and the like? No attitude at all, he says. Participation in them is an individual matter, but individuals should not be discouraged from participation if they are careful of the AA name. So he's saying 700 ways from Sunday, Monty, do not use the AA name.
Yeah.
Don't use the AA name. We don't need the black eye because whatever you're doing is probably going to screw up, and we don't want Alcoholics Anonymous to look like it's screwed up. So question 11. We realize that our present club or hospital setup is contrary in some ways to the general experience, but it hasn't yet given us much trouble. Shall we now change it to conform to the AA traditions? He says that's entirely up to you. If your present setup works very well, it may not be worth the trouble to change now. But if there is much serious objection locally, it may be well to try those principles best proved by our large general experience. And that's a good saying for a lot of things, Monty. If it's working well, fine. If there's any controversy or any turbulence, it may be well for you to try the principles that have been best proved by our large general experience. And Alcoholics Anonymous has learned from its experience, and it's worth paying attention to that. The traditions are based on that experience. All right, number 12. Just what form of corporation structure is usually best? Most states and countries have special corporate forms variously called membership, charitable, eleemosynary.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've never seen that word before. Trust your lawyer to select the best. You might emphasize to him these points. if humanly possible, eliminate the name Alcoholics Anonymous from the corporate title. This name ought to be the sole property of AA as a whole. Limit the purpose clause to one simple objective only. Limit the activities of the corporation to one locality or address only. Don't try to incorporate a whole state or county. Otherwise, AAs in nearby places may well object. And, I can imagine, one of the huge mistakes that was made in Alcoholics Anonymous in more recent years was someone, they didn't incorporate, but what they did is they got a patent on the circle and triangle. So they patented the circle and triangle under Alcoholics Anonymous's umbrella. And what happened now, there might be people out there that will correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard this stuff from people in the service structure. What happened? Basically, what happened was this. There was a bunch of other entities that started to use the circle and triangle, selling recovery stuff outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it became kind of incumbent upon Alcoholics Anonymous, if it did patent this circle and triangle, to protect that patent. So rather than get involved in the court cases and the controversy of protecting something that they've patented, they dropped the patent. And they dropped it from all of our literature. You don't see the circle and triangle on the books anymore, because they felt like they needed to step away from that. They had made the mistake of patenting it. Now that would draw them into controversy. So rather than controversy, let's step completely outside of it, and let's lose our circle and triangle from the literature. Which you could have different feelings about that. I've had different feelings about that myself over the years, but today I don't think it's worth worrying about. But there were periods of time where, I was rightly pissed off that Alcoholics Anonymous made that mistake, because the circle and triangle is a very, very meaningful, especially in, 12-step recovery. The triangle represents unity, recovery, and service, and that's really the three legacies. It was a perfect symbol for us, but we don't use it anymore. Basically because of that. So it says here, this article has been written to help alleviate the many complications that have arisen throughout AA, touching clubs, hospitals, and outside ventures. There is nothing infallible about the principles set forth above, but they are nevertheless the distillation of much actual experience. It's very greatly hoped that they will prove a special assistance to our hundreds of new groups. They may be able to prevent many of the natural but painful mistakes we AA oldsters have often made. So learn from our mistake rather than, I'd rather make new mistakes, Monty, than make old mistakes, wouldn't you?
Sure.
So sometimes you can learn from old. So I'm all about new mistakes these days.
I agree. Wow. Okay. So this is going to actually launch us forth next week into the traditions. As you mentioned last week, we kind of sped through them, but we're going to be focusing on each tradition, and we're probably going to do a couple of them in per show. So I look forward to that. I will tell you that I'm getting quite a bit of response from folks that have never considered even cracking this book or learning any of this history before, and they're loving it, Chris. They really are. And, I don't know that this workshop will become as popular as Walking Through the Big Book was, but it's on its way. And I appreciate you so very much, my friend.
Listen, I'm enjoying this as much as anybody. I'm learning as much as anybody. Yeah, you and I both have basically decades of experience, but digging into the archival nature of these writings is really fascinating. You get a true perspective of how this thing was built.
Right. Yep. It's something. It's eye-opening, it's educational, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for us. All right, listeners, listen, that closes another episode 18 of this wonderful workshop, and we thank, again, our co-host, Chris, for joining us with this on this journey. And, we'll see you next week, and until that time, this is the Monty'man, along with the rest of the Take 12 Recovery Radio family and Chris S., and we're wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof.